Hello, everybody. I am here to talk to you about cognitive, developmental, and mental health challenges. Physical challenges. All right, let's get started. So here's where we're headed. The basics. All right, the bird's eye view here is that these challenges affect over 1 billion people in the world. I believe we have about 8 billion right now. And these folks are often marginalized, and the stereotypes about them are persistent, even though there has been a little bit of work to start addressing that. As social workers, not only is it our job to equalize access, which is what is here on the slide, but also we have to remember that in our work, if you work anywhere in the field doing anything around social work, you are going to encounter folks who are part of this population, and sometimes on multiple levels. And we'll talk about what that means as we go forward. But the point that I am making is that you cannot discount this topic, even if you don't plan on working directly with, the disabled population, so to speak. You are going to be working with the disabled population. So keep that in mind as we go forward through this lecture. All right. This table is in your book. But basically what it is saying is that the top 10 leading disease categories contributing to disability are led by psychiatric disorders, right? So mental health and behavioral disorders and neurological disorders are kind of disaggregated there, but when you put them together, they 18.7, like that's a lot of percent, so of the disabled population. So it's very closely followed by cardiovascular and circulatory diseases. So we're talking here about people with heart disease or with strokes, that sort of thing. So just kind of keep that in mind, is that very first on the list, there's neuropsychiatric disorders. Okay, so terminology and definitions. So very, very broadly, disability is a temporary or permanent reduction in function. Challenge is preferred to disability in most cases, but the thing that I would emphasize here is that you should let the client lead you. You are always going to emphasize the person over condition, which basically means that you would not say, he's a schizophrenic. You would say he is a person with schizophrenia, okay? Because the distinction there is that when you say he is a schizophrenic, you are basically erasing everything else that person also is. Whereas when you say he is a person with schizophrenia, what you're saying is that is a component of his self, right? So we always want to use that type of language. From that point though, like, you should be asking your client what term they want to use, like that. This is true in all areas of social work, by the way. We don't put terms on people. We let them define what they're going through and what they're experiencing. This is just one of those areas. So, it's okay to ask. It is absolutely okay to ask, like, what words do you want me to use in this situation? Do you want me to use challenge? Do you want me to use disability? What words do you want me to use? I have never, ever had a conversation with anybody where I initiated that question and had anybody not say, thank you for asking before replying, okay? So make sure that you are doing that and not putting your own terminology on people. The other thing that I want to say is that proper language in all settings is really important. And when I say all settings, I don't just mean at work. I mean, if you are working with people who have schizophrenia and you have somebody at home who has schizophrenia, you need to make sure that your treatment of that language and terminology is consistent throughout your entire life, that you are not saying he's a schizophrenic about your brother who has schizophrenia and then going to work and saying, my client is a person with schizophrenia. You need to say, my brother is a person with schizophrenia, and also say that at work. And the reason why this is important is because our language, the language that we use, is very, very important to how we think about issues. This is true in every area of life. There is lots and lots of research about this. So we need to make sure that the language that we're using in our heads, out loud, at home, at work, is all the right language so that we're forming our own thought process around that language properly. Okay. So the definition of disabled is sort of federally defined. So it is not really up for debate or redefinition, unfortunately, because it is part of the laws around this population of people. So that's what you're gonna hear when people are talking about the legal structures. Okay, so we have 3 types. We have, and again, we're talking here, we're using the word disability here in this lecture because, again, that's part of the law that we're going to be working with. So that's what we're going to use here in this lecture. So co-occurring disabilities, basically that means what you think it means. It just means that there's more than one, and most people have more than one if they have one. Categorical challenges are, I mean, this is the technical definition here, but essentially what it means is you have sort of pervasive issues that cross lines from one area into the next. Functional challenges are limits to performing daily activities, and those are ones that often can be helped with devices. For example, if you have an amputation and you have an artificial limb, then that's an assistive device, right? So these folks are more likely to be obese, to have diabetes and heart disease, mainly because their movement is often restricted. Okay, categories. So developmental, mental, cognitive, physical mobility. And the reason why I made this a Venn diagram is because I want to make clear that these are things that definitely overlap, and sometimes you can have 2 or 3, or you can have just one, but often you have more than one. All right. The developmental challenges, by the way, all of this is discussed in detail in your book. We're just kind of doing a very basic overview, but make sure that you read about it in your book, because it will almost surely come up on your quiz for the week. Okay, so developmental challenges are by definition a severe and chronic disability that appears before the age of 22. The cause can be all sorts of things, but often is genetic. But it can also, and you're going to see this come up if you, for example, go into child welfare, it can be caused by abuse in childhood as well, either mental abuse or physical abuse. Shaken baby syndrome comes to mind. A lot of brain damage can occur from shaking a baby. So, it can be that, originally that person would not have had a developmental challenge, but that they acquire some sort of injury that creates one. These examples, by the way, most of them are genetic ones, but for example, cerebral palsy can actually be caused by birth trauma, for example, as can epilepsy, or there can be other reasons for that. Fetal alcohol syndrome, actually not a genetic syndrome. It is something that is an impact of the mother's alcohol use during gestation. Okay. So, physical challenges limits one or more basic physical activities. Um, Mobility challenges limit function of moving. So not necessarily the same thing, can be, doesn't have to be. All right, neurocognitive impairment. So remember, this is one of those disaggregated things on that first line of the chart that we saw. Falls into three categories. Intellectual disabilities challenges, they are around thinking and processing. This was called mental retardation in the DSM. It is still called mental retardation, unfortunately. We haven't quite come up with something better than that yet. So if you hear that term, it will come from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, and that's the book that we use for diagnosis and Medicare billing and all of that stuff. But basically, it is measured by IQ, which there's a different issue around measuring intellectual capability by IQ, but that's a different lecture for a different day. So, I think that we often assume that there's nothing you can do about this, and I'm not sure that that's the case. I think that there is a lot of improvement that you can make by putting in supports for these folks. So do not assume that intellectual disabilities or challenges are static. Learning differences. I think a lot more people have learning differences than we think. And it can be from some sort of disorder, such as dyslexia, or we've all heard of folks who have dyslexia, where you kind of switch around characters or numbers. Again, I think that this particular one is learning differences are, I think, underdiagnosed, and people struggle through school, thinking that they're not very intelligent, when really what they have going on is a learning difference that requires a certain type of intervention. But needing an intervention does not mean that you cannot be successful. It just means that you need some assistance to be successful. So if you suspect that you're banging your head against the wall a little bit on not learning the same way that you think that your peers are learning, I would encourage you to look into whether you might have a learning difference, right? TBI is an acquired impairment. So, it's some sort of injury that you have gotten to your brain. All right, history. So, historically speaking, people in this population have not had it easy. There were not a lot of social supports, not a lot of governmental supports until very recently. And treatments were not often the most helpful. They were not always treating people to improvement. For example, lobotomies. Lobotomies, sorry, excuse me. Lobotomies or where you remove part of the brain in order to affect some sort of change in an individual. Very crude procedures, oftentimes, and where they just sort of, scooped out part of the brain. And there are absolutely brain surgeries for, say, epilepsy that are very useful. But we're very specific about what we do now. We don't just do brain surgery and remove parts of the brain willy-nilly, which is essentially what lobotomies were. And the problem with lobotomies was that often removing that amount of brain or going in and removing any part of brain had the effect of removing the problem, so to speak. So if you had somebody with schizophrenia and they were having challenging behaviors in their residential treatment, and you performed a lobotomy, well, maybe the outcome of that, and this is often true, that the outcome of that was that they were basically catatonic at that point, right? And sure, now they're not a behavioral problem, but they also can't think or move or communicate. So don't think that this is about way back when, because they were still doing lobotomies in the 60s. It's not that long ago. Okay, so deinstitutionalization, you'll hear a lot about this. And I believe we covered this in the history of social work chapter, but essentially deinstitutionalization, it was the idea of not packing away people with these types of challenges into, kind of closed hospital spaces where they would receive, whatever treatments, both useful and substandard, that they might receive. But, also just sort of keeping them out of the public view. So deinstitutionalization started in the 60s, and the idea was to move these folks back into the community and to support them there. The problem was that we did move many of them back into the community, but we didn't support them very well. What happened was that they became the core of the homeless population, right? And poor, homeless, mentally ill folks are pretty much the bedrock of the deinstitutionalization fallout. The other side of deinstitutionalization is that though institutionalization was very devastating for a lot of people, honestly, what we need is not to just pack away people to institutions and to throw away the key, but to also understand that we need access to institutions, that some people really do need that intensive inpatient treatment. And the key is around self-determination and including that person in those decisions. There is such a thing as involuntary hold. But involuntary hold is by definition a short-term solution that is designed to help get that person stable and then get them out of that institution. Holds can be expanded to be longer, but hearings are required, like legal hearings are required. If you choose to remain in an institution voluntarily, then you are, demonstrating your self-determination. And they can be really useful. That being said, nobody who has ever been institutionalized says, boy, I really enjoyed that. They might say, I needed it. It was useful, it kept me alive. They might say that, but nobody will ever tell you it was enjoyable. Institutionalization is not enjoyable. And going to an institution for the first time, so going to, say, for example, an inpatient mental hospital, is not a experience you will forget very quickly. All right, social work. So our task as social workers is to attack stigma and discrimination. So the discrimination is the act of, working against somebody. So you might have your bias, your conscious or unconscious bias, but that's your internal state. Discrimination is what you actually do that reflects that internal state. And the discrimination is due to social stigma, right? Is due to the belief that these people are somehow less, right? That stigmatized person loses or fails to gain in the first place their social status. And this can occur anywhere on any level of society, but it is probably the most damaging at work, within families, and don't discount in healthcare, right? You would think that you go to the doctor and it's the doctor's job to take care of you and they treat everybody the same and they don't discriminate. And that's just not true. There's all sorts of documented discrimination in healthcare, around this population, around women, around minorities, all the same experiences that we have in larger society, we also have in healthcare, but it has really real impacts for the people who are receiving that healthcare. Okay, economic and social justice. So, understand that marketplace-based care, so, like any care that isn't provided by the government, limits access to services always, right? So, for example, the cost of assistive technology can be a barrier. If you need a tablet to have a special piece of software so that it can talk for you if you can't speak for yourself, who's going to buy that tablet? Who's going to buy that software? It's expensive. The tablet is expensive. The software is expensive. If that person who has that tablet is a child, it will need to be replaced, either because they have damaged it or because it's all getting old and it needs to be replaced. We need to keep all this stuff in mind. And people with these challenges often lack the appropriate coverage. So, you're kind of getting the very basics at the emergency room, but it certainly is not enough to really service like long-term chronic needs. So, as social workers, it's kind of our job to kind of keep an eye out for this stuff and to help clients advocate for themselves to the extent that they're able to do so, and to advocate for them to the extent that they are not able to do so. Okay, so the ADA, everybody's heard about the ADA. Without the ADA, there would not be lowered sidewalk curbs, there would not be disabled parking, there would not be, disabled stalls in bathrooms. You get the idea, okay? So they define this law defines conditions using a 4-stage framework. And you can, again, read about that in your book. Remember that people are not entitled to protection under the ADA just because they've been diagnosed with a special need. You need to go back up to that 4-stage framework. All right, so person-centered social work, remember that you are not making decisions for clients unless they are literally unable to make decisions, and that decision-making right has been delegated to you. That's not what you're doing. They're making decisions. So really, it shouldn't be involve clients in decision-making. It's be involved in the client's decision, right? So make sure that you are following their lead, and that's how you show respect, okay? You're facilitating access, you're not creating it. The other thing is that we always want to remember that strengths-based assignment that you did. We always want to think about how we can leverage strengths, right? We always want to underline that folks are resilient, and can adjust or overcome to their limitations, and that we're following their lead on how to do that and how to support them in doing that. All right, so that brings us to the end of this lecture. If you have any questions or anything, please bring it to office hours on Fridays from 5 to 6 p.m. All right, thank you.